Thank you, Brother David, for the heartwarming introduction. President Michelle Rogers, General Secretary, my friend and colleague in Education International, Brother Patrick Roach, delegates of this annual conference, fellow educators, greetings of warm solidarity from the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, Philippines. First of all, let me again convey my heartfelt thanks for the award this body conferred me last year. To be the recipient of your International Solidarity Award is indeed an honor, not only for me and my organizations, but for the entire Filipino people who continue to work for freedoms, justice, and genuine democracy. In 2020, just like the rest of the world, ACT was caught off guard by the COVID-19 pandemic, which served as a major obstacle in the organizing and advocacy work of ACT. Lockdown in the Philippines was declared March 12, 2020, which resulted in the imposition of limitations in the movement of individuals, curfews, prohibition of mass gatherings, suspension of public transportation, and implementation of community quarantines were ordered. It's been a year now, and we continue to suffer from the havoc of the pandemic as our government continued to fail to address the problem comprehensively and their utter reliance to militaristic solution. Duterte's tyrannical governance translated to how his government responded to this pandemic. Duterte put in place his most loved and most trusted military generals to lead this pandemic task force, instead of convening medical experts and scientists. He subjected the Philippines to the longest running lockdown in the world, while failing to conduct mass testing, contact tracing, and providing enough and convenient isolation facilities. He was provided enormous emergency powers by the Philippine Congress to juggle funds, but he failed to provide timely aid to our people, especially to the poor. Unemployment rate rose to 9.2%, and inflation rate continued to rise every month, but there is an economic stimulus package that was aimed at addressing the needs of the displaced workers, retrenched teachers, and education support personnel, small and medium enterprises. The 2021 national budget was passed as if there is no pandemic at all. Instead of bolstering the allocation for health and other social services, Duterte increased further the allocation for his infrastructure projects and military expenses, leaving our health system unable to provide essential services to the Filipino people. The education sector also suffered an 11 billion budget slash, leaving the Philippines modular and online learning problematic. Teachers were left looking for resources to have students' modules printed and delivered. Teachers were forced to apply for another loan program so they themselves may purchase laptop computers and apply for wired internet services as the government provided none. As early as June 2020, we have registered to the government that the distance education to succeed, sufficient budgetary allocation must be provided, including provision for teachers' health, benefits, and needs. However, these all fell to deaf ears. Marking the one-year close down of schools, we lambasted President Duterte for being the biggest hindrance to the fulfillment of the youth's right to education amid the pandemic. 2 million more out-of-school youths, while millions are not effectively learning and many are on the verge of dropping out. This is the grim legacy of the Duterte government, who has practically abandoned our youth and has tied their rights and their future to the availability of the vaccines. The Duterte government's inaptitude in delivering education amid the health and economic crisis is evident in the two-time postponement of the opening of class school year last June and August, and in the failure of the ill-funded, poorly prepared distance learning program to deliver accessible and quality education. We are one of the last countries to reopen schools because our president refuses to lift a finger to address the school safety situation. Many schools in far-flung areas with zero COVID case could have been reopened safely by now had the Duterte government saw the installation of water facilities, hiring school nurse, retrofitting of classrooms in the past months, among other measures. Based on our consultation with teachers in the provinces, it is in these poor municipalities where distance learning is failing the most, as schools and local government units have very little resources to support education continuity. Internet signal is weakest, and farmer parents have very little education to be able to guide their children in modular learning. While everybody grapples with the Duterte government's faulty distance learning program, it is undeniably most onerous to the poor, effectively denying them access to quality education. The Duterte government clearly has no appreciation of education's centrality to nation building as it fails to realize that abandoning education amid the pandemic would only worsen the long-term impacts of the health crisis to the country and further drag out the recovery process. The longer schools are closed, the graver the repercussions will be to our recovery. As with Duterte's failure to address the needs of the education sector and to provide doable health measures to manage the impacts of COVID-19 in the Philippines, massive human rights violations were unleashed by the government against human rights workers, activists, church people, critics, personalities of the political opposition, and unionists. The pandemic did not stop Duterte at all in attacking us. He may have, in fact, exploited the crisis to further his repressive measures against the Filipino people. Since March 2020, ACT leaders and members continue to suffer from red tagging, surveillance, in-house and in-school visits of military and police personnel, filing of false charges, and even murder. May 1, 2020, in observance of the International Labor Day, we, in the National Office of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, decided to prepare some cooked food packs to be given to displaced informal workers within the immediate vicinity of our office. While on our way, we were stopped by more than 20 military and police personnel and was accused of organizing a protest action against the government. Thanks to the immediate assistance of our friends from the mass media, who, upon our information, went immediately to our location. Their plan to have us arrested were foiled. Later that day, we learned that several other cost-oriented groups providing aid to displaced jeepney drivers and workers were arrested. They cannot provide assistance to the poor, but they also jail those who provide help. It was June of last year when our coordinator in Bacolod City, Negros Occidental, was gunned down by unidentified military operatives. Before her murder, Sarah was a regular victim of red tagging, tailing, and other forms of harassment, all meant to force her to stop her advocacies. Sarah, a single mom, a dedicated human rights worker, had committed no crimes. She was brutally murdered because she continued her work for the poor and abused Filipinos, especially in the peasant-dominated province of Negros Occidental. But these attacks did not stop us from demanding accountability and better services for the people. Series of mass protests started to snowball again in the Philippines. People were jobless. Health workers were dying due to lack of needed protective equipment. People were dying out of hunger. In order to stop the increasing discontent, President Duterte pushed his allies in the Philippine Congress to immediately pass his anti-terrorism law, which aimed to criminalize dissent. This again pushed the people to go back to streets and protest this draconian legislation. Despite the popular opposition, Duterte's allies passed the law. As of now, the law is in effect while its legality continues to be challenged by at least 33 petitions in the Supreme Court. This law is now the most questioned law in the entire history of the Philippines. The labor movement in the Philippines organized the Council of Global Unions Pilipinas in our aim to bind all labor unions to fight and question the anti-terror law. Aside from the anti-terror law, we also saw how the Duterte government made use or is making use of the judiciary mechanisms to attack us. We first saw this in December 2019 when a number of search warrants was issued by a single judge from Manila Court against labor union offices in Negros Occidental, which resulted in the arrest of 59 unionists and activists under the cases of illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. As of now, almost all of the arrested were freed by the local courts as cases filed against them dismissed. The same tactic of dubious warrants and planting of evidences was done to the indigenous community of Tumandok in La Paz, Iloilo. But this time, it resulted in the gruesome death of 9 indigenous leaders. They were slapped with the same accusations and allegedly resisted arrest. State forces claim that this led to their deaths. Accounts of the witnesses, however, said otherwise. They were showered with gunshots while sleeping. Now, the witnesses suffered the same grim fate. They are all dead now. On March 7, 2021, 46 search warrants were again issued by 4 Manila-based judges against activists and unionists in the southern Tagalog region, which resulted in the murder of 9 and arrest of 6 activists and unionists on the same accusations of illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. This incident is now called the Bloody Sunday. The education sector is of course not spared by this tactic. Last February 2, 2021, Mr. Nestor Ada, a school principal in Northern Samar, was arrested while sleeping in his quarter inside the school, again on cases of illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. Fortunately, the court allowed Mr. Ada to post bail for temporary freedom after several witnesses came out to refute the allegations of the arresting officers. The most recent case was that of Ms. Rosanilla Consad, assistant principal of a high school in Butuan City, Mindanao, and currently the secretary of ACTS Union in the region. Ms. Consad was arrested this time on a case of attempted homicide. Ms. Consad allegedly participated in an ambush by the rebel group against the military in a distant place where Ms. Consad is teaching. This case against Ms. Consad is the 4th one in the list of trumped-up charges against her. All other 3 charges were dismissed by the court as Ms. Consad successfully probed her incapacity to have been part of any rebel activities in the region. Aside from being an assistant principal and secretary of the union, Ms. Consad is a special education teacher and is a single mother to a child with special needs. She is indeed very busy and loaded with her task as a teacher, unionist, and as a loving mother. Ms. Consad is on temporary freedom now after we posted bail for her. However, we fear that many more cases will be filed against her and her colleagues as this is the practice of the police and military personnel in the region. Almost all activists and unionists in the region were already jailed on cases of murder, homicide, arson, and child abuse, including the rights workers who assisted in the aforementioned posting of bail for Ms. Consad. Ms. Consad is the 5th teacher arrested during this pandemic. Before her were teachers from Mindanao, Teacher Juliet, charged with inciting to sedition for posting on her social media that people should go to the gymnasium where food packs are stored, after she saw people having nothing to eat because of the lockdown and lack of aid. And her son, Teacher Ellie, who tried to stop state forces from unjustly arresting his mother. Teacher Ronel Mas, arrested on charges of inciting to sedition after a satirical post on his Twitter account saying that he was willing to pay 50 million pesos to anyone who can kill Duterte, alluding to Duterte's proclamation that he will pay 50 million pesos for each rebel killed amid state pronouncements of lack of funds for testing and financial aid amid the lockdown, and the earlier mentioned teacher Nestor. These continuing attacks committed by the government of Duterte against critics, unionists, and activists are indeed vicious and lethal. We cannot even begin to imagine the anguish felt by loved ones of those that fell victim to the murderous fascist state. For many activists and unionists who are still free and alive like me, we do not feel free at all. We continue to fear for our lives. We continue to fear for the lives of our loved ones who may be implicated in the madness unleashed by Duterte. I myself have been victim of these human rights abuses by the present government. I am continuously deprived of my right to go home, to sleep in my bed, to be with my family, and most importantly, to sleep and rest peacefully at night. Night after night, our chests feel like it will explode with the thunderous beating of our hearts as every bark from a dog may mean another office or home is being raided, another set of dubious warrants. Will I be the next victim of the government's evidence planting modus? Will my house will be filled with explosives and armaments put there by the state forces? Will I, too, be declared as non-laban or someone who resisted arrest, hence killed? Living under the Duterte government is like living under a demonic landlord. As for many, I can only say things that will be fine when Duterte is out from power. The longer he stays in power means more human rights abuses, more killings. With the continuing human rights crisis here in the Philippines, international organizations like Education International and international labor organizations, as well as platforms under the UNCRC and conferences like yours, provide much needed help for our people, if only to amplify our cries and just demands. You are providing us means to tell the world the grim state of our country. You help us condemn and seek justice. The international community is very important in our overall endeavor to end human rights abuses in our land and to bring justice to victims and their families. We do hope that platforms like these continue to be given to us, that you continue to let us speak and listen to our burdened hearts, that solidarity among us be further strengthened as we push for a genuinely democratic and just society. Friends, I am Raymond Basilio, an educator, activist, unionist, a Filipino. I am proud of my people, of my country, but I am ashamed of my government. On behalf of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, I would like to wish you all a very fruitful annual conference and that this may pave the way to comprehensively plan of actions aimed at protecting fellow educators, students, learners, and our communities as a whole. Long live international solidarity.